So shalom everyone. This is a very special lesson that I'll be sharing with you all today. I've received a lot of requests about the various Sephers that I've published, and I've spent some time with you all sharing various scrolls, Y.I.R.A.H, Tikkunei Yirah. I had one live where I shared many different physical manuscripts, but I've received a lot of requests about what published books that I've brought forth, and so I've brought them here with me. So this is a stack of the published books that I've written. But before we get into that, I'd like to address one of the main questions that I get a lot. And that question is, what exactly is Yirah? And when I talk about Yirah, sometimes people hear in a direct association with HaMashiach, the Messiah. And where is this idea coming from? Is this an idea that I'm developing myself, or other people are developing, or is there actually a substantiality to the secret of the word Yirah in relation to Mashiach? So, for those of you that don't know, most of my Sephers are called either by the name Tikkunei Yirah or Likkutei Yirah, which essentially means, the tikkuns of awe or Yirah, and the corrections or keys of Yirah or awe. And the secret behind this is that my entire corpus of writings has been centralized around the secret of Yirah. Now, the idea of Yirah is a very esoteric one. It is mentioned, of course, in the Tanya, for example. It's mentioned throughout the Zohar as the first and foremost of all precepts. Amongst other places, I did a lesson where I shared with you all from what Sepher Yirah stated, which was, of course, the writings of Moshe de Leon. But I'd like to cite another source. So this source comes from a very esoteric Sefer called Omek HaMelech, or the Depths of the King. Here's a 2-volume set. Most of the Sefer is written in Aramaic, but the latter portion is written in Hebrew. And this was written by Rav Naftali, who received direct lineage from the Arizal. And he writes in his Sefer Omek HaMelech something staggering. Now, this book was compiled hundreds of years ago and can be rather difficult to get your hands on. Although there are versions of it, it's still in circulation today. It's very lofty and not known outside of very specialized Kabbalistic circles. But my chief disciple, Shaul Malcho, has successfully translated a copy of it. So I have that copy here. So you can see here, this is the not for resale version. He sends to me many of his Sefers to review before an official release is made. But regarding the aspect of Yirah, I'd like to share with you all what chapter 20 says. It states, "And in the future to come, Samael and all the ministering princes of destruction will be rulers over the nations of the world." So in the world to come, that is to say, at the time of the coming of the Mashiach, Samael will be the ruler over the nations. It says, "For the youth of 100 years shall die," which is written regarding the nations, but concerning Israel it says, "He shall swallow up death forever." And at that time, King Mashiach will reign over the supernal and the lower worlds. And spirits and demons will torment the nations by the hand of Ben David, similar to the matter of Shlomo with Hiram, king of Tyre. So the story of Shlomo and Hiram, king of Tyre, has to deal with the building of the temple. And Shlomo HaMelech had sent a shed, demon, to Hiram, king of Tyre, who would torment him. And it says, similar to this matter, it says, "Who sent him one demon and brought him down to the 7 levels of Gehinnom." Meaning Shlomo had sent a shed to Hiram, the king of Tyre, and he brought him into the 7 levels of hell, until he fulfilled his will and admitted to him And so too with the Queen of Sheba. Now, this is where it says something very interesting. He says, Tikkunei Yirah HaMashiach, by the power of Yirah, the Messiah, all nations shall come. And they shall grasp the corner of a Jewish man's garment, and the merit of the tzitzit on the talus, which is the secret of the Or Makif. For one may go out with it even to the lavatory, meaning to the bathroom, and it does not receive impurity. There's a great mystery behind this. But nonetheless, Rav Naftali writes explicitly that by the power of Y.I.R.A.H HaMashiach, all the nations shall come. And so the idea or the insight of the secret of Y.I.R.A.H and HaMashiach is not a novel one. It's an ancient one. Many that are not versed in the depths of the Kabbalah might not be familiar with it. I've explained in many different places how Y.I.R.A.H is a numerical value of Adam Elyon. With that being said, you can begin to understand why the name of the various treatises were Sepher Yirah, or the Book of Y.I.R.A.H. Because awe, which is the definition of Y.I.R.A.H, sometimes translated as fear, is as it is written, Yirat Hashem Rashis Chokmah, that it is the beginning of wisdom. And similarly, it is called Rashis Da'as, the beginning of knowledge. Now, the beginning of wisdom, Yirat Hashem Rashis Chokmah, is Kether. And so Y.I.R.A.H is rooted in the attribute of Kether. It mentions regarding Y.I.R.A.H that Y.I.R.A.H is the secret of Yechidah. Yechidah is the highest light of the soul. In a multiplicity of places, for example, the Zohar mentions this on Pasim explicitly. And it is also mentioned in the writings of Sepher Yirah by Moshe Leon and in other places. But here, Rav Naftali receives a direct lineage from the Arizal, writes explicitly, Tikkunei Yirah HaMashiach, that by the power of Y.I.R.A.H HaMashiach. And this is in direct alignment with what was written regarding Shlomo Melcho, who wrote regarding the nature of the Mashiach. He says, Y.I.R.A.H me'oso ha'ari. Y.I.R.A.H, whose letters are the Ari. And I'd like to enlighten you guys to the nature of this, because many Westerners are coming from a Christian background, and many Westerners come from this idea of this Hellenized version of the term Messiah, which is a Jewish term. Mashiach means anointed. And the Jewish idea of the Mashiach as a flesh and blood human being, it is not the idea of a God-man. That is the Hellenized Greek version, what they call the Christ, so on and so forth. They got that idea because essentially Zeus and others would embody themselves as human beings. The gods would incarnate themselves into human forms, and from those human forms they had the conceptualization of a manifested divinity, but no such idea exists within inside of actual Judaism. And Christianity was heavily influenced by that. So when they hear the term Mashiach, or they hear the term Messiah, they have in their mind God, or they have in their mind divine being. In Judaism, there's no conceptualization such as that. The Mashiach within inside of Judaism is a flesh and blood mortal human being that uses the bathroom like you and I, that suffers and struggles like you and I, so on and so forth. Now, there's another level of it, and that within Judaism, there isn't just a single Mashiach. There are actually Mashiachim, meaning multiple types of Messiah. There's what we call Mashiach ben David, or Messiah, the son of David. Mashiach ben Yosef, Messiah, the son of Joseph. Mashiach ben Dan, Messiah, the son of Dan. And Mashiach ben Ephraim, Messiah, the son of Ephraim. And then there is that which is called HaMashiach, the Messiah. Now, to give you guys a little bit of clarity, the term Mashiach means anointing, and it means anointed. And this is an important and critical distinction, because it allows you to kind of understand the only differentiation between the Jewish conceptualization of the Mashiach and any other person is a certain anointing that you'll receive from Hashem, from God. And that anointing is the insight, the panemios, the light of the Torah. And so in multiple places, our sages talk about the Torah of Mashiach, which will be not a different Torah, but rather the panimios of the Torah, the internality, the inner level of the Torah, from which our sages say it will render the Torah of this world vanity, so on and so forth. But nonetheless, I felt it was important due to the amount of questions that I get regarding the nature of Yirah. What is Yirah? And why do I hear some people saying it's associated with the Messiah? To properly educate you guys with a correct source. Again, I'll show you all one more time. So this is Sepher Yirah, The Death of the King. And this is a 2-volume set written by Rav Naftali hundreds of years ago. And he writes again regarding this. I'll cite it one more time. By the power of Yirat HaMashiach, all the nations will come. Michoach Yirat HaMashiach. And so the idea of the name Yirah being associated with the word the Messiah is not a novel or new thing in the sense of it's just spontaneously kind of existing right now. Rather, it's something very ancient. And I've given some prior sources from Sefer HaRimon by Moshe de Leon and Shlomo Malcho in his writings, Y.I.R.A.H, Milso, Chari, and then of course Rav Naftali. So I'd like to break away from this just for a minute and give a couple of announcements. So a new Sefer has been published, and that is Tikkunei Yirah. I have just received it today. In fact, I'll go ahead and show that to you all. Let me move this out of the way. You'll see a new box. My book publisher has recently sent to me the 25 copies. These are all fresh beta copies of the new volume. This is a box filled with them. So to add to the collection of books that I've already published, a new Sefer. This Sefer is called Tikkunei Yirah. And you can see on the front cover of it is a portrait. You may recognize this portrait displayed behind me. This is a wonderful conceptualization for an actual oil painting that is currently in the works, and I'll show you the back. The back of the Sefer contains a wonderful portrait of me teaching my wife, and her name is Rachel, a highly celebrated name in Kabbalah, and truly the merit of all of my Torah is upon her. Many of the teachings that I've brought forth were teachings that I in private taught to her, and she insisted that I bring it to the broader world to teach you all. And this Sefer is called Tikkunei Yirah. And the beautiful thing about this Sefer that just was released today is that it is actually a physical copy available to you all. So, before I go into any depth of this, I'd like to give you guys the opportunity for a small Q&A to ask some questions, and then perhaps I can maybe share with you all some of the various Sefers that I've written throughout my time teaching Kabbalah publicly. As mentioned, before I ever taught things publicly, I wrote many different manuscripts, many of which you have seen, the giant tomes. For those of you that aren't familiar with that particular lesson, on my YouTube Restoration of the Breach, you will find a video in which I have very large tomes, probably stacked higher than me, and in those tomes I manuscripted everything in an old-fashioned style before I ever began to teach publicly. And then, aside from those manuscripts in which I've written, of course, the different tikkuns, the goat skin Ilanot, and the various 45 feet scrolls, 7 of which I've completed, I've published many works. And so I'd like to give just a brief opportunity to do a Q&A and give you guys the opportunity to ask any questions, and perhaps I can answer some of them. Hashem willing. So I'll let my wife, who's the excellent camera person, she's behind the camera always, kind of helping to maintain everything. Select a couple of questions if you guys have any.
Somebody asked, what's with the Scottish Rite gloves?
So I have gone through the Masonic degrees. I was the youngest person in the history of my lodge to have ever been initiated into the Blue Lodge with color skin and tattoos. And after my degrees in the Blue Lodge were completed, I obviously went through the Scottish Rite. And I became a Master of the Royal Secret, which is the 32nd degree. In the midst of that, I did a video citing and quoting Albert Pike's excellent citation regarding the nature of Kabbalah, where he infamously states, and the lecture regarding the Master of the Royal Secret from 30th degree, 31st degree, 32nd degree. In his lectures he writes that all of the scientific hopes and dreams of Swedenborg, St. Martin, the Illuminati, Jakob Boehme, and others, all truly dogmatic religions, all of Freemasonry and its appendant bodies, owe their symbols and secrets to the Kabbalah. They come from the Kabbalah and they ultimately return to the Kabbalah. And I'm very outspoken against Western esotericism. And again, for those of you that have watched my lives and seen the lessons and so on and so forth, or seen the actual tomes and manuscripts, you will know that I've written entire tomes dedicated to Western esotericism. So when I speak on those matters, I'm not speaking from a place of ignorance. The same thing with Freemasonry. And so, again, the Shorosh, or root of all of those things, are within inside of the Kabbalah. I hope that answers the question.
Olive writes, witnessed. When are you and Rose going to visit the Holy Land with me?
That's funny. So what I'll say about that is, Moshe never entered the Holy Land. Moshe was not permitted to enter into the Holy Land for a variety of reasons. And that's because the physical land was not the land that was intended. In fact, if you read the Sepher Torah, at no place does he actually enter into the Holy Land. That occurs post-Torah, in what is written, Sepher Yehoshua, regarding Yehoshua ben Nun, of course. But regarding Moshe, it says that his burial was not fitting for him, and it says of him that the children will enter into the land. And this gives us a dramatic secret behind this. The Zohar comments on this, and he says, it says, while the burial for Moshe Rabbeinu was not fitting for him, but it was fitting for Yehoshua ben Nun to bring them into the land. For assuredly the face of Moshe shined like the sun, and Yehoshua ben Nun shined like the moon. And it was fitting for him whose level was the moon to bring them into that place called the land, which was called the level of the moon. And for those of you that have ears to hear and understand the deep things, much will have been revealed to you in that statement.
Astrology Sage writes, is Tikkun HaOlam Frankish in nature?
Not at all. So Tikkun HaOlam just means correction of the worlds. And the term Tikkun means correction, and HaOlam means of the universe. These ideas of Tikkun HaOlam originated with inside of the Arizal. Indeed, later on down the line, there is a Frankish sect which was brought up post-Shabtai Tzvi. For those of you that know, I am probably the only person on the entire internet that has truly revealed the Frankist ideology. I have an entire playlist set to exposing the dangers and fundamental theological ideas behind Frankism, where many people kind of talk about the concept of Shabtai Zevi and so on and so forth, maybe the Bavarian Order of the Illuminati, so on and so forth. Not a single one of them have ever touched the theological components as to why are they doing these things. Not exactly that they're doing them, but why are they doing them? So on my YouTube Restoration of the Breach, I have a playlist called The True Religion of Evil, where I reveal and expose the lies and understand the actual theological components behind Franke's teachings. Tikkun HaOlam was never used by Yaakov Frank. That the term Tikkun HaOlam is used by right-wing Christian extremists. And I've talked a lot about this, and I know that this probably upsets a lot of people, but it is the truth. There is a surging amount of anti-Semitism and Jew hatred that is coming right now out of the extreme right wing of Christianity. And unfortunately, a lot of it has to deal with ignorance and not actually having a real understanding of what it's saying. But Yaakov Frank never actually mentions the term Tikkun HaOlam, and that is just anti-Semitic propagation. And I would definitely, I know that the person who asked that question obviously was sincere in general, sincere in heart in asking the question. But that's very dangerous rhetoric. A lot of that stuff is supplanted for different anti-Semitic neo-Nazi type viewpoints. Those are the types of viewpoints that were pushed forward, of course, by Hitler and so on and so forth, and then later kind of adapted because Hillary Clinton and so on and so forth mentioned Tikkun HaOlam, and Tikkun HaOlam in its highest level literally means correction of the universe. The Jews believe that they have a role, a very important, significant role within the correction of the world, that they try to make the world a better place. Now, of course, as with any group, there are people that do things that are not so good, but that is with any group. You can't expect every Muslim to be perfect. You can't expect every Christian to be perfect. You can't expect every Jew to be perfect. It'd be absurd. But it is a very dangerous rhetoric that is going on right now. So regarding to Tikkun HaOlam, there's no connection between Yaakov Frank and the term Tikkun HaOlam. That doesn't exist. The people who propagate that, and there are a couple of people, unfortunately, on this app that do promote that. There's that one, the tattooed person. I can't quite recall his name, but he promotes a lot of that rhetoric. He brings my name up, unfortunately, quite often. And I've mentioned about his grave allegations, so on and so forth. And it's a very unfortunate thing, but he's not the only one. There's quite a few others. Candace Owens and many other people are mentioning this kind of Tikkun HaOlam and kind of following into this kind of propaganda. But I have the words of Yaakov Frank, and at no point does Yaakov Frank actually mention Tikkun HaOlam, nor does he bring about an understanding of Tikkun HaOlam as it relates to Frankism. So it comes from the Kabbalah, and it's the idea that the Shavira Kalim, or the shattering of the vessels, that inside of every single person is a spark of God. And the tikkun means the correction, that every person has their own kind of personal correction that they need to make with God. And that's what the term Tikkun HaOlam, through the collective correction of every human being, ultimately it will lead to a better universe or a better world, per se, from that. But thank you for asking that question, because I think that shows a lot of initiative to try to discern kind of the riffraff. Definitely educate your guys' selves. You don't need to take my word for it, so on and so forth. The words of Yaakov Frank are publicly available. You can look up and see for yourself whether he said those things or not. Of course he didn't. And yeah, I would be cautious. I would say that use critical thinking. Just because someone says something very convincingly, or maybe someone's very emotionally passionate about what it is they're saying, do your own research and question and come to your own logical conclusions. That's a very critical thing. The most dangerous thing in the world is a half-truth, because it can have the conviction of truth, and people can believe it, and that's where the danger is. So thank you for the question.
Have you ever created a golem, and can you explain about the third temple?
So have I ever created a golem? So I'll tell you a secret. So golem, Gimel Lamed Mem, is the same numerical value as Chokmah, and it comes from Tehillim, which is to say Psalms, and the pasuk, or the verse, that states that Adam was a golem. And so Adam was called a golem before he was manifested. We know that he was made from the dust of the ground, and so he was this ground entity before it was breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And the secret of the golem is really only expounded in one text. In fact, it was that text that I had quoted from earlier. This Sepher here called Amek HaMelech, which was written by Rav Naftali. I cited it when I mentioned Yirah in relation to HaMashiach. And his opening gates, he talks about the secrets of the golem, how the golem is made from the 231 gates, and goes into great detail behind that. Now, have I created a golem? Not in the Frankenstein's sense that one would have you kind of believe that it refers to, but we have mapped out the 231 gates and formed the divine image of the human being through those 231 gates, which is what the process of creating a golem describes. So from that understanding of its context, 100%, yes. But in the sense of, did I create a Frankenstein monster out of dust and clay? No. And then to answer the second part of your question, you mentioned the third temple. The Zohar tells us that there's no third temple mentioned inside of the Torah, and that the temple that we are waiting for is not a temple made by the hands of human beings. It states that the first and second temple were actually a sin to have been created, and because of the sin of having created those temples, they were destroyed. And King Solomon knew this, or Shlomo HaMelech actually was aware of this, and so he said, regarding this matter and human beings creating the temple, unless the Holy One, blessed be He, builds it, those who build it labor in vain. And that's because Shlomo HaMelech knew that his temple was made by the hands of men and therefore would not last. And similarly with the second temple, which was created post Zerubbabel, so on and so forth, and that temple also did not last. The Zohar actually speaks staunchly against the idea of a physical temple, because it speaks staunchly against literal interpretations. And so the idea of a third temple doesn't exist inside of the realm of the Kabbalah. This is why the prophets say you sacrifice to demons, so on and so forth, because the illimitable one, blessed be He, has no need of actual sacrifices. The idea of the sacrifices coming into the temple, so on and so forth, were actually a sin. And the creation of the temple, or a physical temple in which animals would be sacrifices, where Peshat interpretations of the Torah would be carried out, was also a sin. There's an extreme reason why there's pushback against the Zohar, why they don't want people reading the Zohar, especially Jews, because if they were to read the Zohar, they would illuminate their eyes and mind to the proper interpretation of the Torah, and they would also see things like what the actual Y.I.R.A.H and mixed multitude are. And the Tanya reinforces this idea. Y.I.R.A.H chapter 26 says the same thing, that redemption comes about through the Zohar. The Alter Rebbe was fully aware of this and wrote this down. But because of the whole Shabtai Zvi thing, so on and so forth, the Zohar became fairly dangerous for European Jews. And they tried to distance them, where, the prohibition, until you're 40 years old, so on and so forth. That prohibition came about because of the Sabbatian heresy from Shabtai Zvi. And that really only applied to European Jews, but Sephardic Jews, so on and so forth, they study Zohar in kindergarten. But in regard to the third temple, I'll tell you what the temple is. The Zohar tells us that just as the entire universe was created through the letters of the Holy Alphabet, Lashon HaKodesh, and the letters alone, so too was the temple created by the letters and the letters alone. The three objects, the altar of incense, right, the shewbread and the menorah, personify the three mother letters, Aleph, Mem, Shin. Aleph is the air, the incense, the altar. Shin is the menorah, fire, Aish. In Mem are the two stacks of shewbread. The 7 branches of the menorah are the 7 double letters in Hebrew alphabet. And the 2 stacks of 6 shewbread for 12 are the 12 elemental letters. And so the holy place, or these 3 objects, are actually the 22 letters. And through the 22 letters, one enters into the Holy of Holies, in a place where they would have a meeting with God. And that's what's written, He wraps Himself in light. And similarly, by Yer Elohim et Or Kitov, that God saw et ha'or, et the light, where et, which is Aleph to Tav, are the first and last letters of the Hebrew alphabet, identifying the 22 Hebrew letters as the light. So when it says He wraps Himself in light, it means He wraps Himself in letters. These letters, of course, are called the Word, and this is the actual temple. And this coincides with exactly what our sages stated, that Bereshis is a saruf or permutation of base Rosh, which means the first temple, and refers that the first temple the temple of God existed before creation began. And of course, if you now understand the Zohar's interpretation that the temple is actually the Hebrew letters, then you understand what that refers to. Of course, the Hebrew letters existed before creation began. So, in terms of a third temple, they may be trying to build it, but it's futile. It's just error. Same thing with the destruction of the second temple and the first temple, the temple of King Solomon. It's all just error. I completely side with the words of Rashbi in the Zohar that these things were in error and sin, and we don't wait for a physical temple made by human hands. Yeah, I hope that was able to provide a little bit of clarity behind the true temple of God versus the man-made, temple of death.
Zoomer writes, on a side note, do you believe that they really went to the moon?
What was that?
Zoomer writes, do you believe that they really went to the moon?
Really went to the moon? I can't really comment on that. I don't know enough information about it. A wise person knows when he doesn't know. So, I don't have an opinion. But, interesting question. I can do some research on it. Yeah, thank you though.
Hex writes, how to end reincarnation.
So to end Gilgal, to end reincarnation requires tikkun, or correction of the soul. Every soul is brought down through what we call the Shavira Kalim, or the shattering of the vessels. And every person has a certain correction that they have to make in life. And when they obtain that proper level of correction within inside of their life, each person is unique, each person is different, each person's correction is different. They will no longer need to reincarnate inside of that cycle. It's very important that, because within inside of Judaism, Gilgalim, or reincarnation, is just a basic tenet of life. It's not even considered mystical, and it's not really considered part of the Kabbalah, although there is a part of the Kabbalah that deals with reincarnation, but it's not Kabbalistic in its inertly. And this makes it very distinct from other monotheistic religions. For example, Islam rejects the idea of reincarnation, and so does Christianity, but this is a basic tenet and idea within inside of Judaism. So to answer your question, when a person is able to identify the sharosh, the root of their soul, and identify the need for the correction, but each person's correction is different. And I can tell you that what you struggle in and what you excel in gives you hints and clues as to the nature of your root and overcoming certain things. Perhaps you need to overcome lust, or perhaps you need to overcome anger, or perhaps you need to learn to develop gratitude, or empathy, or love, or kindness. And that's the correction. That a basic example, though of course your situation may be different, so I hope that was able to assist a little bit. Okay, so I'd like to go break a little bit away from the Q&A. Thank you all for asking wonderful questions, and just kind of share with you guys a little bit of the history behind these various Sephers that I've published over time, and then maybe read a little portion of Tikkunei Yirah with you all. It is now available on bookbaby.com. You guys can look it up on Google, Tikkunei Yirah, or Likkutei Yirah on BookBaby. Find that, and then you just click on author, and you'll find it. For those of you, if you guys are watching this on YouTube, I do plan on uploading this to YouTube. I will, of course, provide links for that down below. So these aren't going to be in any specific order, but I'll just go ahead and give you guys a little bit of a glimpse. Again, they're not going to be in any specific order, so of where we're at. So
Josh said he loves you.
Josh?
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you, Achi. I love you too. Thank you. This particular Sefer was a very special Sefer that I compiled. It was a commentary on Genesis. It was very lofty. The highest levels of the Ludianic corpus. It contains inside of it many of the different tikkuns and diagrams from my Elah notes. You guys may be able to see it here. My scrolls. So you may see this. On the introduction of a lot of my old YouTube videos, you will have seen that, describing the secrets of the Mashiach, so on and so forth. You can see a lot of hand-drawn tikkuns describing spreading of Chesadim and Geburos. And so this particular Sepher goes through all of the chapters of Genesis. It goes up into the first 5 chapters, and is a excellent Sepher, especially if you really want to understand the Panimios of the Sod. But because of its extreme loftiness and how heavy and in-depth the material is and technical material is, I haven't really gone too much into promoting it, although I may do that in the future. Lurianic Kabbalah has been very cut off. Many people call it a close practice, so on and so forth. So there's not a lot of information really known about it here in the Western world. This is another Sepher that I compiled called the Torah of Mashiach. This is a very, very, very special Sepher. It deals with the Torah of Atzilus, the Torah of Emanation. In my last lesson in live, you may have seen the explanations behind it. It is filled with tikkuns and diagrams and explanations regarding the nature of things. It brings everything down into a real world level, giving them associations with organs, parts of the body, so on and so forth, and how we can understand things, so on and so forth. Some people have described it as a Kabbalistic medical text, although it's not really a medical text, but it goes into how the human body, anatomy, so on and so forth, are a direct reflection of the internal worlds and the workings thereof. This next Sepher is called a Seder HaAtzilus, which we call the Order of Emanation. This is a very, very, very powerful text. It deals with a conversation between a teacher and his students, and in the process of this conversation, he reveals to his students the secrets behind emanation, the world of Atzilus, its emergence, so on and so forth. It's a very invigorating and gripping Sepher because it challenges you in a lot of very profound and deep ways. The next Sepher that we have here is the called Tikkunei Yirah, Tikkuns of the Darkness. It is a series of tikkuns that deal with 131 aspects of the Sita Achra, meaning the other side. And they deal with very, very, very profound things. You know, we can find Tikkun 43 here. Ein Sof is the gematria of Hasod, Samael, so on and so forth. And this is kind of a counter to Tikkunei Zohar, the tikkuns of radiance, in which that deals mainly with the levels of the light. This explicitly deals with the levels of the darkness, but the real darkness. And it is a very challenging text because there's no particular order in which the tikkuns are actually compiled, but rather they're a series of keys that allow you to glimpse, kind of like a person walking through a dark night sky, and then a bolt of lightning flashes, and for just a brief moment you can see the overall horizon. That's what this text is. In fact, I considered it a little too dangerous to release by itself, so this version of it is not available on the market anymore, but you will find it in another place. This is, of course, the infamous Likkutei Yirah. I've made copies of this particular volume available for everybody via a QR code. This is an exhaustive text dealing with a complete theurgical process regarding the highest Kabbalah. And because of its importance, I've made it entirely free as a QR download for anyone who's seeking to download it. I can show it to you here. On the inside of every volume is a QR code. I don't know if you guys are able to screenshot that. But with that QR code, you'll be able to obtain a free PDF copy of the entirety of Likkutei Yirah. It is the central corpus of many of the teachings that I've dedicated my life study to, and because of the importance of its message and the importance of its insights, I've made it available. Now, there are physical copies of it available. You guys can find it on Google, Likkutei Yirah. They're about $200. That's a little expensive, but considering that the QR codes are for free, and you can obtain a copy of it for free. It's mainly for those who like to study having a physical copy. This was my fourth book that I compiled. It is called Sepher Yirah. It is an excellent Sepher, only available on bookbaby.com. And it is an exhaustive text dealing with countless tikkunim, so on and so forth, that goes into extreme detail on the 50 gates. It goes on to an extreme commentary on Y.I.R.A.H, so on and so forth. It's truly an amazing text. To go back to the person who was talking about a golem, there's a picture of a Kabbalistic golem on the front of it. The difference between the book of Y.I.R.A.H, Sepher Yirah, and Likkutei Yirah, white and black. Yeah. This particular text is a very interesting one. Again, this one has to deal with the Sita Achra, and it is called The Mother Sin and the Foolish King. And this is a massive breakdown and commentary onto a very esoteric portion inside of the Zohar that talks about Ima, or the supernal mother, creating it without Abba. If one was to fully understand the nature of this particular text here, they would have a firm grasp at the root of all Gnostic cosmological understandings, so on and so forth, except from a Judaic perspective and as it is sourced and expounded in the Zohar. In essence, this entire Sepher is a massive commentary on the Zohar. This next text here, which is a very esoteric text here, is called Sepher Hasod Harazin Hasatan, The Secret Mysteries of the Satan. Again, another incredibly massive Sepher, which deals with the highest mysteries of darkness and the secret mysteries of the Satan. Now, these two texts, in addition with Tikkunei Yirah, are no longer available to the public, but there is another source and volume for them. This is the 10th book here. This is called Sepher Yirah, the Book of Dragons, and you can see this book is a masterpiece of Nubian Kabbalah. It is incredibly advanced. The tikkuns, diagrams, and everything inside of it are of the highest caliber. It is, I never even intended to publicly release it, the level that it's at, but I decided to later on. It's, for the most part, entirely illustrated, dealing with very, very, very deep, profound aspects regarding the nature of Kabbalah, so on and so forth, how to understand these things. And the Book of Dragons is still available. This is not available. This was my third volume. This is a complete commentary on the Book of Revelation. I mentioned that I not only know and am versed with inside of the deepest levels of Kabbalah with a K, which would be Jewish Kabbalah. I'm also incredibly versed in Kabbalah with a Q, which is to say Hermetic Kabbalah. And that does come to include the secrets of the Book of Revelation. And so this particular volume is especially special. It's entirely illustrated and deals with the entire Book of Revelation, verse by verse, line by line, tikkun by tikkun, and lifted from a manuscript in which was all written in Hebrew upon the same, where you'll see the actual manuscript on this page, and then you'll see the Hebrew version of the Book of Revelation over here on this page. And it's like this throughout the entire Sepher. Now, many people are talking about the Book of Revelation. Many people have insights and desire to know about the Book of Revelation, but I'm reluctant to teach about this because, again, I approach it from a much different perspective. Although the entirety of the Book of Revelation is inside of this particular Sepher, it is a masterpiece within and of itself. Again, you can see the original manuscript from the Book of Revelation. It's only in Hebrew along with the tikkuns, and then the translation on the side of it. And it is verse by verse, line by line, in the entirety of all 22 chapters. So, this book is no longer available. I've taken it off of the market. But perhaps maybe one day, if there was like a petition or something, I may bring it back and allow a couple of people to obtain it, or maybe I'll release it for a short period of time for people that are truly seeking to know the Book of Revelation. This is Sepher Yirah 2. This is a commentary on Y.I.R.A.H, another excellently charged book. You can see on the inside of it the different tikkunim. you'll see on each page there's the different diagrams on the right and the explanations on the left. And this is how this entire Sepher is from the manuscript and the translation. And it's an entire commentary on Genesis, not quite at the exhaustive level as the secret commentary that I showed down below, but nonetheless. This is the infamous Sepher Yirah 1. This particular book, of course, is kind of what started it all. If any of you have a copy of this, it's incredibly rare. I've not had it on the market for quite some time. And this is the beginning of it. This is an excellent Sepher. Everything inside of it was produced in color. It deals with the crown jewel. You can see it here, with the structure of the Hebrew letters. It gives some explanations in regard to the kings and so on and so forth.
Someone asked if you shipped to Israel.
If I had personal copies to sell, possibly, but we would have to arrange how the shipping would be worked out. It's very difficult to ship to Israel because of what's going on, so on and so forth, and the cost of shipping things outside of the country in some cases can be more than the book's price itself, you know. So, so this is book 1. I'm going to go ahead and put this up here. And then here's one that you can still find. I highly encourage. This was a very special one. It is called the Book of Y.I.R.A.H, the Book of Ascension. This is an Ascension text. All the pages are very special in this volume because they're all black. And they all have the colored images on the side. Again, you guys can find this volume on bookbaby.com. I can leave a link for it down below. So on and so forth. And of course, it's all in color. And this was an exhaustive labor to accomplish and complete. So that brings us to the conclusion of the history of my published works. I'll give you guys a little bit of a glimpse of exactly what it is that I've published. You guys have now seen my various Elon notes, scrolls, my various tomes and manuscripts, and now the various published works. A lot of them aren't in circulation anymore, and that's because I've taken them out of circulation for a variety of different reasons. And that brings us back into the newest edition, which is Tikkunei Yirah. And this is a very, very, very special text, and I'd hopefully like to read to you a couple portions from it. And I was thinking of potentially making a copy of it available to you all, perhaps a signed copy to a random person. Some questions?
Yes. Traveler81 writes, what is your own favorite book out of the ones that you've made?
Out of the ones that I've made, I would say Likkutei Yirah, Sepher Yirah 9. You guys can find it, of course, by just typing in Likkutei Yirah. You guys can get it from BookBaby. I would highly encourage you to get it from there, as opposed to, I think it is possibly also available on Amazon. And then shortly behind that would be the Book of Dragons, and then Tikkunei Yirah without a question, followed by Torah of Mashiach. Likkutei, just because it's a very unique text that kind of concentrates and conceptualizes a lot of the integral ideas that are found throughout the various different Sephers, and puts it into kind of a theological system that's fully functioning. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask. And I was thinking perhaps if you guys are interested, I'll read to you a small portion of Tikkunei Yirah and give you guys a little bit of an example of what's inside of it, if that's something that interests you all.
Everyone's saying thank you and they would love a sample from your book.
Well, thank you all for being here. Yeah. Okay. So you guys glimpse of a little bit on the inside. You can see the tikkuns that are there. It opens, a group of friends gathered to listen to the words of the Torah. They said to him, "Teach us, we are desirous to learn from you." He handed a list to him and said, "Expound these complexities, for we struggle to comprehend." He opened with, "The secrets of God are with those who fear him." They said, "Assuredly we fear him." He responded, "The secret of God's Y.I.R.A.H. Y.I.R.A.H. So the very opening of the Sepher has a pre-contextualized warning of sorts, and maybe not so much as a warning, but so much as a explanation of sorts. It says, "This Sepher was compiled and written to expound upon the deepest and most esoteric levels of the concealed parts within the mysteries. It is designed to unveil the keys to the closed school of Ma'aseh Merkava, the workings of the chariot." It addressed the complexities of the evil inclination and continues in the revelation of Adam Elyon, its functions and the forbidden aspect of the Kabbalah. The text is challenging and designed to be so. Due to the depth of its content, it will change its meaning each time you read and reread. It is not intended that you will understand its mysteries as you first read it, rather that you will think that you understand them. As you progress, it will radically change and transform its nature so that what you first thought you understood couldn't be the farthest thing from the truth. The book challenges us from the very beginning and tells us that it is designed to be challenging. As you read it, you will think that you come to understand certain things, but then you will find something inside of the Sepher that will radically change the way that you perceived it before. And so the intention is not that you will actually understand it, but rather that you will think that you understand it. And this entire method was intentionally employed to help the development of spiritual progression and the progression of the deeper insights, to challenge what you think you know and to challenge what you think you believe, and ultimately then transform them, and to see how perspective is viable and how perspective is volatile and subjective to change upon interaction with new information. So I was asked by my wife to share two portions. She wanted me to share on the creation of the heavens, and she wanted me to share the gate of righteousness. So on the creation of heaven, understand the heavens are Zeranpin, the forms by which express themselves, surrounding and rooting themselves in Tiferet, the central spheres of Zeranpin. This is the sod of the heart, which is Tifereth, and the sun, whose metal is gold. Regarding this it is written, a furnace for gold. Thus the heart is a furnace, from which burns with 7 kinds of fire. These are the lights of the furnace that impress themselves upon the heart. These lights then birth angels, which rise up from the bestial soul, which is housed in the heart, into the divine soul, which is housed in the brain. For these lights of the heart, being various influences, arise and become angels, words, by which they are contemplated upon, and these angels, or words, become by process of thought, heavens, or concepts, and birth, as it were, heavens, by which existence enters. For one then applies focus to concepts, and these matters, which are in truth existence-altering dimensions, to a multiverse. These heavens then become filled, milei, by other lights, which are influences in the heart, in varying emotions and desires that ascend into the brain to become words and thought, and ultimately concepts, which are heavens. This process continues, and so it was said of the birds, being the angels, according to their kind, for one emotion produces thoughts, which produces concepts, or heavens, and which descend back into the heart and birth, as it were, emotions or angels, which become more thoughts, which produce more heavens. The idea behind that is that influences from the heart start off within the heart, and these influences ascend from the bestial soul, which is located in the heart, and they are garbed in words, which are angels. For the word melach means messenger, and messenger means a relaying of information from one place to another. And these words then ascend into the brain, and when they ascend into the brain, they gather together, and so that the groupings of words create concepts, or the groupings of angels create heavens. And these concepts or heavens, the existence being the true identity, then enters into. So I'll go into another gate, the gate of the righteous. Now, amidst the traps of the upper world lay the gate of righteousness. This gate is one of the highest traps of the ego. For far beyond the simple consciousness of the bestial soul, who sins and walks in error by means of simple desires and mundane matters of the material, is the ego's sense of self-righteousness, which is the highest perversion of spiritual truth. Thus the ego, the serpent, becomes empowered by sucking on the supernal lights of holiness. It exalts itself by the perception of righteousness. It seeks to be viewed as righteous before the eyes of others. For this births many more angels and many more heavens by which it exists. However, I will speak to you of a great secret that avoids the corruption of their gaze and the crushing of the head of that serpent. Self-righteousness is the serpent's manipulation, in which the individual views themselves as righteous, or seeks to be viewed as righteous by others. The endless is rooted in aim, nothing. For the true reality is the aim, meaning nothing. And the dream is that it is something. Therefore the Zohar stated, Yesh Me'ain, something from nothing. The gate of righteousness opens to the one who is nothing. For validation, which is measurement, and conditions placed upon or by any individual, removes them from ever uniting with the illimitable. For as long as they have measure, they will never attain to that which has no measure. These are some of the opening passages to this particular Sepher, between a discourse between a teacher and a group of students. And I hope you guys were able to benefit from the understandings that were being posited regarding the creation and the nature of heavens and the secret of the gate of righteousness, from which the Pasuk says, "Open to me the gate of righteousness." Again, this Sepher is available on bookbaby.com under Tikkunei Yirah. If you guys are on YouTube, I will leave a link to it in the comment section down below. For those of you that are on TikTok, my YouTube is Restoration of the Breach, the same as my TikTok name. In addition, I have Skool, skool.com/Y.I.R.A., where I teach the only source of true and authentic Kabbalah openly and publicly there on that platform. You guys can find a link to that if you're on YouTube, comment section down below. If you guys are on TikTok, and the link in my TikTok bio. So I'll take a brief moment to perhaps answer a couple of questions if you guys have any. And if you guys want to hear a little bit more about this, maybe I can read another little portion from the Sepher, but I'll leave it to you all.
Jimmy Hoffa says, again, please. And people are asking you to read more.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'll read to you guys a small portion from chapter 2. This occurs on page 25. It ends with, a student asked, "What do you expect?" I responded, "Betrayal and suffering." Another said, "I love you." I responded, "You love what you have taken from me. If I had not done these things, you would not have loved me." One arose and said, "Tell us of the evil inclination." Chapter 2. The abuse of the evil inclination. The evil inclination is formed from the desire to receive and is empowered by a collective sum of experiences that form the persona or identity of an individual. It has been explained at length how the world of the chariot personifying the 7 forms called the 7 midot are 7 vessels, and how these 7 forms, spirit form, desire form, higher self, soul form, emotion form, mental form, and physical form, act as garments for the true identity, which is a spark of the infinite, consciousness of the illimitable, filtering itself through these various lenses or garments by which reality is experienced. It has also been explained at great length how these experiences are recorded as good experiences and bad experiences, forming collective sums of experiences by which build upon these vessels as tarnish does on silver. This tarnish is called zechomah, and from this zechomah, the serpent, or the persona, is birthed, whose power is in speech. It has been explained how this serpent, or persona, formed by the collective sums of experiences, then speaks to you via the mental form. And so you hear a voice in your head. For the power of this serpent is its speech, as it is written. The serpent spoke to the woman, an example, the body. From here, it convinces the individual that this voice is the true identity, and so the person slowly surrenders choice to identify with this persona, by which after time convinces the individual expression of consciousness that this persona is the true identity. The person then surrenders his choice and simply acts and reacts from the impulses of this serpent formed by the amalgamation of a collective sum of experiences. After a time, this serpent, having seized control of the individual in that they identify as this persona, then comes to believe that it is God speaking to them. The nature of this persona is evil, and so it is written, "The thoughts of a man's heart are evil continually." For the heart is the root of the bestial soul, and the thoughts that arrive from the bestial soul are rooted only in the animal desire to receive and control. The thoughts that arise from this bestial soul empower action, and thus evil is brought into the world by the actions of human beings. The methodology of abuse cycles implemented by the evil inclination. Being rooted in the desire to receive, it perceives only its own perspective as being true, filtering current experiences and other experiences through the lens of their own sums of experiences, or persona. They initiate a cycle of abuse. When presented with the success, accomplishments, or achievements of others, they will actively ignore an accomplishment of another for the explicit purpose of diminishing the value of another person, their achievement and contribution to existence for the explicit purpose of defending, subconsciously, their own sense of inferiority. This cycle of diminishing the value of the accomplishments of others is an abusive projection of abusive behavioral patterns that, when successful, causes the victim of abuse to feel depressed, depreciated, worthless, and suffer. Thus evil is brought forth. When something is presented that does not align with the persona, the serpent's perception, they will actively seek to diminish this perspective and align it with their own perceived perspective, filtering the experiences or contributions of others through personal sums of experiences for the sole purpose of molding the perspective of another person to fit their self-identifying beliefs. Even in situations that do not call for a challenging of beliefs, an example, someone shares a hobby they enjoy, and the response of the abuser, fueled by the evil inclination, is to respond with backhanded statements. Who cares? You actually enjoy that? Yeah, that's cool, but... These are just a few small examples in a textbook list of abusive responses, designed to justify the abuser's bias and diminish the value of the victim's sense of happiness and self-worth. The evil inclination, in an attempt to form its own perspective as the only perspective, will actively ignore the contributions of others in any capacity in order to project a sense of self-perceived dominance of the abuser and inferiority of the victim. The result of this diminishing of self-worth causes emotional and mental trauma. Often, the abusers do not recognize themselves as abusers, and when confronted will forge themselves as a victim, for the sole purpose of maintaining moral superiority and diminishment of the victim. The explicit purpose is to form their perceived persona as the only true existence. In the process of doing so, they inflict further emotional and mental abuse to their victim. Often, these abusers will remove themselves as a passive, aggressive technique to emotionally and mentally abuse their victim without communicating their motives. They intentionally stay vague to prevent their own self-realization that they are abusers, wicked, horrible individuals. The intention is to make their victim feel distressed and replaceable, diminishing their self-worth and exerting their sick will to control and inflict suffering to their victim. In order to maintain moral superiority, they will resort to mental and emotional gaslighting, forging things that legitimately call into question their motives to personal insults, an emotionally charged perspective for the explicit purpose of maintaining a perceived sense of moral superiority, their perspective and persona to be the true perspective and others to be false. They will actively take form and take from those around them while providing nothing in return. Friendships are formed for the explicit purpose of fulfilling personal benefit, and practical function for the sole purpose of furthering their own sense of perceiving self-importance. The value of others are perceived and valued only according to the furtherance of the evil inclination's persona's sense of importance. That which does not further their own importance is viewed as irrelevant, and that which furthers their own personal sense of importance is given pleasantries, praise, and acknowledgement, until the abuser obtains what they need from the victim, and then the victim is left in pursuit of another, by which the cycle repeats. This leaves the victim with emotional and mental trauma. They will actively ignore while simultaneously stalking those they abuse for the explicit purpose of a perceived sense of control, seeing others as characters and pieces to control in their own perceived game of life, and further their own perceived sense of self-importance. Relationships, both platonic and romantic, become cages for the victim to live within the parameters set forth by the abuser, so that the victim will experience abusive aggression and microaggressions, both passive and actively, in order to be molded and controlled into fitting the role and narrative set forth by the abuser. These abusers will actively shower an individual with pleasantries, compliments, and adoration, while in their presence, and while they still offer something that allows them to the furtherance of their own perceived importance, while behind their back, and amongst others, will actively participate in diminishing abusive language, designed to humiliate and minimalize the victim, or will stand idly by while they see others diminish and use abusive language against these people, as they subconsciously or consciously agree, and even may see abuse as justified from their own sick perspectives. These types of abusers will find justification for their abusive behaviors by giving the perception that the abuse was warranted or even just. And when they view others abusing the victim, they will stand by and do nothing. Often because the abuse they are witnessing fortifies their own persona's perspective of justification and validation for warranting abuse. Sometimes they will witness abuse, both verbally, mentally, and even physically, of friends, and will oftentimes not put an end to the abuse or seek to stop the abuse out of fear of confrontation. For in the mind of the abuser, public image and the persona's social standing is a central object of perceived social and moral superiority. These types of people claim to care about supposed friends and others alike, but will actively be an accomplice to another person abusing their friends by their cowardice of inaction, contributing to the abuse themselves. Needing to maintain control, they will, in all cases, make themselves a victim, a technique which allows them to be an abuser without acknowledging the fact of their abuse. This allows them to abuse others while justifying their motives through the lens of victimhood. These abusers often operate through Hod, their emotion form, forging reality, perspective, and even perceived facts through the lens of validating emotional positions. When emotional positions are challenged, these abusers respond by utilizing negative emotions as a weapon, weaponizing anger, hostility, and other aggressions or microaggressions in order to control another via emotional manipulation. Instead of reason and logic, these types of abusers, formed by the evil inclination, will personalize all interactions in order to filter existence by their will to receive, making even mundane comments or rational and logical statements to be personal attacks by which the abuser responds with emotional volatility. The reason for this response is a result of the interaction being perceived as a challenging of the position of perceived importance of the abuser and the abusers. Emotionally volatile response as an attempt to invalidate or diminish the victim. Logic and reason are viewed as not important or even oppositional by these types of abusers, because anything that does not strengthen their perceived sense of importance and the narrative they have forged for themselves is hostile and must be met with aggression or microaggression. When utilizing microaggression, these abusers use suggestive language in order to convey their intentions while still retaining plausible deniability, thus allowing them to weaponize and use the weaponization of the moral high ground if confronted. And in addition to already subjecting the victim to mental and emotional abuse, will then label them as crazy or even aggressors themselves, all in an attempt to not only maintain moral superiority, but also to acquire victimhood as reinforcements to their abuse. These abusers will also use body language to communicate their emotional volatility in order to control the comfort or even perceived safety of others, and an attempt to control the behavior or actions of their abuse victim. These types of abusers lack proper communication skills and must utilize microaggressions, aggressions, deceit, manipulation, abuse, and control to communicate. What they lack, the ability to communicate with others verbally or directly. When these abusers finally do communicate, it is emotionally volatile and filled with challenges to their own perceived identity and persona, utilizing aggression and hostility to argue and fight, resorting to degradation, slander, manipulated perceptions in order to force their positions. When these abusers evolve their communication, they become sociopathic narcissists, and in extreme cases, psychopathic, where they can express extreme criticism and opposition of others in cold, heartless, and blunt manners that reinforce only their perception as being true. They list what you are doing wrong and make for themselves judge and jury. These abusers will at all costs defend their perspective as the only true perspective, manipulating the narrative and drawing others to join their positions to appear to have the socially accepted high ground, spreading gossip, slander, and libel to others, so that, by popular opinion, justify their abusive behavior and sabotage their victim in any way possible. These types of abusers will often accuse their victims of what they themselves are doing. As discussed previously, they will paint themselves as a victim, turning the victim into an aggressor. In relationships, this is often seen as a cheater who accuses their partner of cheating. This method of abuse is used in order to place the victim within the parameters of perception, giving the illusion of needing to prove themselves or qualify themselves to the parameters set forth by their abuser. In order to control their victims and conform them to the mold they have placed them in, within their persona's worldview, they will actively dismiss any positive traits and focus on anything perceived to be negative, and in support of the abuser's need to diminish the self-worth and value of the victim. They perceive as a threat to their own personal sense of importance. These types of abusers constantly place qualifying expectations on their victims, and when the victim has met one of these expectations, they forge for themselves another expectation, constantly invalidating the self-worth or importance of their victim. Most of this being rooted in the attribute of fear. They justify this form of abuse by decrying insecurity while simultaneously leaving their victim with a sense of replaceability, not being good enough, and under the stress of abandonment, forming emotional and mental trauma. These types of abusers, when confronted, use personal insecurities or past traumas, negative sums of experiences, to justify their abuse and invalidate the suffering of the abuse victim. Invalidating the suffering of their abuse victim becomes necessary so that the world can still revolve around their narrative, diminishing the victim's suffering by justifying the abuse with their own perceived sufferings in life. These abusers will often present themselves as even being virtuous, upright, or even just, for these attributes validate the abuser's sense of perceived importance. They will view their victim as flawed, damaged, or even evil, as this reinforces perceived superiority and justifies the mental and emotional abuse they inflict upon their victim. These types of abusers invalidate and ignore their own abusive behaviors in order to maintain justification of their actions. They will diminish the suffering of the abuse victim by using their own perceived moral justifications or excuses by comparison to ensure the only narrative that is correct is the abuser's. The abuser will often create a narrative and spread that narrative either directly or indirectly for the purpose of maintaining a social sense of superiority. In doing so, they maintain justification and reassertion of the abuse being warranted. This is necessary in the mind of the abuser to fortify and prevent doubt or guilt. The abuser will use language instituting a false sense of support to then diminish the worth and or contribution of the victim of abuse. The This is seen in the instance of someone who offers opinions that are veiled with malicious intention. An example viewing the accomplishment of someone and offering criticisms designed not for constructive development, but for control and to belittle. I saw your new book, but the way it was perceived makes it look like you are self-centered. The aim of this type of language is to diminish the self-worth and contributions of the victim. So that's a very small chapter dealing with inside of the deep, complex psychological profile of the evil inclination and Maaseh Merkavot, the workings of the chariots, and dealing with the occult psychology of people who operate from their evil inclination, the desire to receive, and the types of abuse and evil and suffering that they inadvertently bring into the world. It was explained in various different places throughout the examples given, of which there were 32, that they have to convince themselves that their abuse is warranted and justified. And they do not view themselves as abusers. Quite the opposite. They do this to prevent the consciousness from having a reckoning with the reality of their condition. And this is imperative on behalf of those who operate in order to justify or warrant this. So it's a very, very deep and complex breakdown of the psychology of the evil inclination and those who operate and are rooted in it. So thank you all. I guess I'll take a last couple of minutes and answer any questions if you guys have any.
Everyone is saying powerful teachings in there.
Again, those are all from the new Sepher called Tikkunei Yirah, the Tikkuns of Yirah. And it was just released today, so it is publicly available. I highly encourage you guys to obtain a copy of it yourself and read it. It's designed to be very challenging, to challenge the way that we view the world, challenge ourselves, and it will transform itself as you read the text. And it is one of the only Sephers out of all of my Sephers that is written almost as a narrative. And the narrative is in the sense of a student speaking with a teacher, a group of students speaking with a teacher. And the teacher is giving certain responses to their questions, and the reactions that they give, you'll find oftentimes will reflect our own responses to some of the claims and statements that are made. And it's designed to do that, to identify within ourselves very deep corrections that are inside of the soul. So, well, the last thing I'll have to say then is if you guys are looking to study more material regarding the genuine Kabbalah, again, skool.com/Y.I.R.A.H. You guys can find a link in my TikTok bio up there. I also, for all of you that have iOS, I should bring this up. I've produced 3 apps: the World Peace app by Y.I.R.A.H, the complete Zohar app by Y.I.R.A.H, which has Tikkunei Zohar, and then the final app is the Sepher Yirah app. And you can find all of these only on iOS as it stands right now, that is on Apple. And they are incredible apps which, for example, the Zohar app has the complete Zohar unredacted, and it is an interlinear from the Malcho translation, which we recently completed. It also includes Tikkunei Zohar and a complete search bar function. The World Peace app, which allows us to see the Kavod, or the glory of Hashem, in reality by using AR technology, so on and so forth. And then the Sepher Yirah app, which is a very special app that deals with many different Sephers. A lot of these Sephers are on this app, and it also has a search function. Some of them are not available to the public, so definitely if you guys have iOS, feel free to go check that out. Sepher Yirah app by Y.I.R.A.H. If you click down there or find it on the Apple Store, you click on the developer and you can see the other apps that are there. And again, Tikkunei Yirah is officially released, So I highly encourage you guys to all pick up a copy of it if you guys are looking to get into the inner depths of Maaseh Merkavot. Thank you all for being here with me. As David HaMelech said, open my eyes and I behold the ones of your Torah. Amen, everybody. Shalom and Salah.